The morning they retired Vale, I gave the order that no order book in the household had a line for, and I gave it with my voice steady because that is what they pay an officer to do, keep his voice steady while everything in his chest is coming down like a wall in slow rain. "Mount the honor party," I said. "Walk pace. We are going to the long field." And 19 men who had served under me for years went and drew their best tunics for a horse. I should tell you what Vale was, because if I only say a regimental charger, 29 years old, gone gray at the muzzle, you will picture a tired animal in a paddock, and you will not understand why a kingdom's hardest soldiers asked, one by one, in the quiet way men ask for the thing they are afraid to be refused, whether they might stand in the line that morning. Vale was the horse that carried the color of the household of Kaer through the whole of the Southern campaign and came home. He was the horse that did not run when running was the only sensible thing in the world. He had been the mount of 3 different riders across his service because he outlasted them on the muster rolls, and every one of those riders, when his own time came to leave the regiment, went first to the stables and put his face against that gray neck and said a thing none of us were meant to hear. "I am Captain Aldous Wren, and I commanded the ceremonial squadron of the household of Kaer for 11 years, and in all that time the hardest morning I ever stood was the morning we buried a horse with full honors in a kingdom that had no precedent for it, and watched grown men we had seen unmoved through worse than any of you will ever know take off their caps in a field and weep without shame. I am going to tell it to you the way it happened, because it deserves to be told properly, and because I have learned that the things worth keeping are very often the things the rule book never thought to mention. He had been failing through the autumn. The veterinary officer, a careful man named Surgeon Crew who did not believe in giving false comfort, came to me in October and stood in my office turning his cap in his hands the way men do when they have brought you a thing they wish they could carry alone. "It is his age, sir," he said. "Nothing more and nothing less. The heart is tired. The joints are gone in the off hind. He is not in pain, I would not let him be in pain, you know that, but the winter will be hard on him, and I do not think he will see the spring, and I do not think we should ask him to try." He looked at me steadily. "He has earned an easy end, sir, whatever you decide. He has earned that much." I had known it was coming. You always know. But there is the knowing in the abstract, the thing you carry at the back of your mind through years of good mornings in the stable yard. And then there is the man standing in your office telling you the season has a name, and the name is now. I asked Crew to make him comfortable and to keep him out of the wind, and I told him I would think on how it should be done. And when he had gone I sat for a long while and did not think on anything at all. I just looked at the wall. You want to know why it mattered so much. I will try to make you feel it the way we felt it, and then you can judge. A ceremonial regiment is a strange thing. We are the part of the army that the public sees and the part that the public often enough laughs at, the still men in the tall caps, the polished show, the soldiers who, the tourists like to say to each other, have never done anything but stand there. We hear it. We hear all of it. And we say nothing because saying nothing is the entire discipline, and because the men who say it have not earned the answer. But underneath the show there is the regiment, the real one, the one with the long memory, and a regiment's memory is held in strange vessels. It is held in a battered drum that went somewhere terrible and came back. It is held in the names cut into the chapel wall. And in the household of Kaer for 29 years, a great deal of it had been held in a gray gelding with a white off-4 who would stand stock still through gunfire, through brass bands, through the worst weather the coast could throw at a parade, and who had carried our color. The thing that is, in the end, the regiment itself made into cloth, through a campaign that took a third of the men who marched out and gave them back to us as names. That is what Vale was. He was where we kept it. So I did not want him put down quietly in a loose box on a gray afternoon with 2 men and a tarpaulin, the way you would end any old beast that had given good service and worn out. I am not ashamed to say it. I knew what the world would say if it heard full honors for a horse. The man's lost his sense. And I knew, too, that I did not care what the world would say, because the world had not been at the river crossing and Vale had. The trouble was not whether to do it. The trouble was that there was no way to do it, no standing order, no precedent. No paragraph anywhere in 200 years of the household's regulations that told an officer how to render the honors of the regiment to an animal, because the men who wrote the regulations, sensible men all, had never imagined an officer mad enough to ask. I went to the colonel. He was an old man by then, Colonel Hugh, near his own retirement, and he had ridden Vale himself as a young captain in the campaign, had been, in fact, the second of the 3 riders, and had brought the horse and the color both home across the ice on the night the bridge went, though he never spoke of it and I only knew it from the citation. I told him plainly what I wanted to do, and I watched his face, ready for him to tell me I had taken leave of my reason. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How will you do it? There's nothing written." "No, sir," I said, "there isn't." "Then you'll have to write it," he said, "properly. Not a pantomime, Wren. I'll not have a pantomime over that horse. He deserves better than a show. If you do this, you do it like the regiment means it, every fold of it earned, or you don't do it at all and you let crew see to him quietly and you live with that. Which will it be?" "I'll write it, sir," I said, "and I'll do it right." He looked at me a long moment. He carried me off the Aldermere Bridge with the color round my body and a hole in my leg I've still got, he said, very low, as if to the window and not to me. "I have wondered for 40 years how to thank a horse." He cleared his throat hard, the way old soldiers do when the thing has come too close. "Write your order, Captain, bring it to me, I'll sign it." And then, as I reached the door, "Wren." "Sir." "Do it in the long field, the west one below the wood. He used to graze there as a young horse before the campaign when none of us knew what he was." A pause. "He'll know it, give him that." So I wrote it. I sat up 2 nights with the regiment's order books open around me, and I built the thing the way you build any right, out of older pieces that already carried weight, a fold borrowed from the color ceremony, a pace borrowed from the funeral march, the long slow draw of the white gloves that we use over a fallen man, all of it bent, carefully, honestly, to fit a horse and a field and a thing none of us had words for. I will not pretend I knew I had it right. I only knew I had it true. There is a difference, and a man who has stood enough vigils learns to feel which one he is holding. And then it was the morning, and I gave the order no order book had a line for, and we walked out to the long field below the wood with our best tunics on, to render to an old gray horse the honors of the regiment he had carried for 29 years. I had not slept. I want to be honest about all of it. I had lain awake with the worry that does not let an officer rest, not whether the men would come, I knew they would come, but whether I had built something that would hold, or whether the first cold gust of the real morning would show it for what a sensible man would call it, which is a captain making a ceremony out of his own grief and dressing it in borrowed cloth. That fear walks beside every man who tries to do an unprecedented thing with dignity. You do not know, until you are standing in it, whether you have made a right or only a fool of yourself, and there is no one to tell you, because there has never been one before. The field was white with the first true frost of the year. I remember that. The wood at the top of it was bare and black against a sky the color of old pewter, and the grass came up stiff and silvered under our boots, and our breath went up in front of us in the still cold air so that the whole honor party seemed to be smoking gently as we walked, 19 men and 1 officer, pace by pace, down the long slope to where surgeon crew and 2 grooms waited by the old gray horse. They had brought him out at first light, blanketed, walked slow, and stood him at the bottom of the field where the ground was level, and the frost had not yet hardened it. Near the line of the wood he had grazed as a colt before any of us knew what he was. He stood with his head low and his ears moving slowly at the sound of us coming, and as we came down he lifted his head slow. It cost him something. You could see it cost him, and he looked at the line of red coming down the white field toward him, and I will tell you what I have never been able to explain and have stopped trying to. He straightened. That old gray horse, 29 years old, the heart of him tired and the off-hind gone, saw a parade coming, and he set his feet and lifted his head and squared himself the way he had squared himself 10,000 times on 1,000 mornings when the trumpet went, and he stood to be inspected. A horse cannot know. I have told myself that 100 times. A horse cannot know that the parade is for him, and yet I have stood enough parades in my life to know what it looks like when a soldier comes to attention, and I am telling you that the old gray horse came to attention by his own habit, by 29 years of it bred into the bone, because a column in red was walking toward him in step, and that is what you did when that happened. You stood up. You stood up, and you let them see you had not let go of the thing. I had to halt the party. I had to halt it and stand a moment with my back to my men, looking at the wood, because an officer does not let his squadron see the first of it come up in him, and the first of it had come up in me hard, watching that horse straighten. Behind me I heard the whole line of them go very still in a particular way, the still of men who have each been hit by the same thing in the same instant and are each, separately, holding it down. We are good at that, the household. We have practiced holding it down our whole lives. It is most of what we are. When I had my face I turned and I marched them on, the last 40 paces, and I halted them in a line facing the horse, and I gave the command to dress the line. And they dressed it as if the king himself were watching, every interval exact, every man squared, and the old gray horse stood at the foot of the field and watched 19 of the kingdom's hardest soldiers come into a perfect line for him, and his ears went forward, and he did not move. I will tell you about the men, because the men were the part I had not planned for and could not have. Word had gone round the lines, the way word does, quiet and complete, that the captain was taking the old horse to the long field on the Tuesday morning, and that there would be honors. I had asked for 19, a full honor party with the under-officers, and I had thought that would be the end of it, a private thing, done properly, the regiment's own grief kept in the regiment's own field. I had not reckoned on the rest of them. They began arriving before us. When we came down the slope there were already men at the edges of the field, in 2s and 3s, men off duty and men who had traded their duty, and 1 or 2 old men in plain coats who had left the regiment years before and had driven half the night when they heard. They did not crowd in. That is the thing I remember. No one came onto the ground we had marked for the right. They stood back along the hedges and under the bare wood, bareheaded already, caps in their hands, and they had brought no cameras and made no noise. And there were more of them every minute as we came down, coming up the lanes on foot in the cold dawn, and by the time I had dressed my line, there were near 300 soldiers standing silent around the white field to watch an old horse be honored, and not one of them had been ordered to come. You do not order that. You cannot. It is the one thing in soldiering that no commander can produce by an order, and every commander prays in his heart he has earned. They came because of what the horse was, and what the horse was the thing they could not say out loud about themselves. That they had each, in their way, carried the color too, that they had each stood when standing was the only thing left, that they each had a river in them somewhere they did not speak of. The horse had done out loud, in the body, the thing they had done in the heart, and they had come to stand for him because no one had ever stood for that in them, and never would. And this was as near as the world would let them get to being honored for the thing the world does not see. I understood that standing in the frost. I understand it better now. And it is why I knew when I saw them coming that I had not built a pantomime after all. You cannot draw 300 hard men out of their beds before dawn into a freezing field for a pantomime. They have a sense for the false. They came because it was true. I began the honors. The first part I had taken from the color ceremony, the part we call the drawing of the gloves, and I had kept it almost whole because it carried the right weight already. I drew off my white gloves slowly, one finger at a time, the way you do over a fallen man, slow, deliberate, the slowness itself the message, the slowness that says I am not in a hurry to be done with you. And as I drew them, my 19 drew theirs exactly together, 19 pairs of white gloves coming off in the frost in one slow movement, and around the field 300 men who had no gloves to draw bared their heads instead, the last few caps coming off, so that the whole white field went bare in one breath, every head uncovered in the cold for the old gray horse, and the horse stood and watched it happen with his ears forward, and the wood was very black behind him, and no one made a sound. Then I walked forward alone. The honors I had written gave the inspection to the officer, and I had thought hard about that, because an inspection is a living thing. It is the commander walking the line and seeing each soldier and being seen by him, the oldest courtesy in the army, the I see you that is the whole of why men will stand in a line at all. You cannot render the honors of a regiment to a thing you will not walk up to and look in the eye. So I walked forward across the frost, alone, in my shirt sleeves and bare hands in the cold, and I came up to the old gray horse, and I stopped a pace from him, and I looked at him. He looked back at me. His eye was clouded a little with age, but it was steady, the same steady eye that had not run at the river, and his breath came in slow gusts of white between us, and his ears were forward on me, the way they had been forward on 100 officers across 29 years. I did the inspection the way you do it for a soldier you are proud of, and are about to lose slowly, fully, letting him be seen. I looked at the white off fore, gone yellow-gray with age. I looked at the worn places on his shoulders where 3 generations of riders' legs had sat. I looked at the long gray neck that 3 of those riders had pressed their faces into, and said the thing none of us were meant to hear. And I put my bare hand flat on that neck, the way I had put it 10,000 times, and I felt the warmth of him still in it, the great slow warmth of a living thing that had carried the regiment and was tired now. And I said the only words of the whole right that I had not borrowed from anywhere, that were mine, that I had made for him in the 2 long nights, and I said them low so that only he could hear, the way the others had. Stand easy, old soldier. You're relieved we have the watch. You're relieved. We have the watch. It is the oldest courtesy a soldier can do another soldier to take the post off him, to tell him the line is held, that he can put it down now and rest, that the thing he gave his whole strength to keep is safe and will be kept by other hands. It is what we say to the dying when we are lucky enough to be with them. It is what the relief says to the sentry in the dark and the cold of every watch in every army that ever was. You're relieved. We have the watch. Go and rest. We have it now. I had wondered in the writing whether it was too much to say it to a horse. I do not wonder any more. I felt the great body let something down under my hand when I said it. I will not tell you the horse understood the words. I do not believe that. But I will tell you that a creature that has been at attention its whole life knows the difference between a hand that wants something from it and a hand that has come to let it stop. And the old gray horse felt my hand say stop, and he let his head come down slow, and he leaned the weight of it, just the weight of his great tired head, against my chest. The way he had leaned it against 3 riders, and he stood there leaning on me in front of 300 bareheaded men, and I stood and held the weight of him and did not move, because that, in the end, is the whole of what we are for. We are the ones who hold the weight and do not move. I do not know how long I stood. Long enough. Then I straightened him gently and stepped back the single pace, and I drew myself up and I gave him the salute. Not a parade salute. I had written it differently, and I will tell you why. A parade salute is sharp, snapped up and snapped down, the salute you give a passing officer or the color going by, correct, quick, a thing of the surface. But there is an older salute under it, the slow one, the one you hold, the one we give at the graveside and the lowering of the color and the names on the wall. The salute that does not snap because it is not a courtesy of the surface but a debt of the heart, and you hold it because holding it is the whole point, because the length of the hold is the size of the thing you are paying. I gave the old gray horse that salute. I brought my bare hand up slow to where the cap badge would be, and I held it, and I held it, and behind me without a command, 19 men brought their hands up with me and held, And around the white field 300 men who had no caps to salute under came to attention in the frost and stood at attention bareheaded. And we held the salute to a horse for a long, long count in the cold and the still air. And the old gray horse stood and took it with his ears forward and his head up, taking the honors of his regiment the way he had taken everything for 29 years, without moving. And I tell you, there was not a sound in that whole field but the wind moving once lightly, in the bare black wood at the top of it. When the salute came down slow, the way it had gone up, I gave the field back to Surgeon Crew. This is the part I will tell you plainly and not linger over, because the old gray horse had earned an end without spectacle, and I will not make a spectacle of it now. Crew was a gentle man and a skilled one, and he had told me long before how it would be done, quietly, kindly, with the horse's head against the chest of the groom who had cared for him longest. In the field he had grazed as a colt, with the wood he knew at his back and no fear in it and no pain. We turned the honor party about. That was in the order I wrote, and I am proud of it. At the last, the regiment turns its face away, not from shame and not from cowardice, but because there is a dignity owed to the passing of a brave thing, and the dignity is privacy. We do not stand and watch. We stand and keep the field for him while he goes, our backs to him, our faces to the world, holding the line so that nothing comes near, so that his last sight, if a tired old horse sees anything at the last, is the man who loved him in the field where he was young and not a ring of staring faces. We held the line and kept the watch, and behind us, quietly, in the kind hands of men who had cared for him for years, the old gray horse was relieved of his post. I will tell you that not one man in that field moved. 300 soldiers stood with their backs to it and their heads bare in the frost and held the way we are taught to hold, the way Vale himself had taught half of us to hold without ever saying a word, just by standing still through everything for 29 years until standing still through everything became the thing we were. We held until Crew came quietly to my side and said, "Lo, it's done, sir." He went easy. He just leaned on Hollies and let go. And I said, "Thank you, Surgeon," and my voice was steady, because that is what they pay an officer to do, and then I turned the party about to render the last of the honors, the part that is for the keeping. We buried him in the long field below the wood. I had thought about that too, whether to take him away, render him down as the world does with old horses, sell the hide and the rest of it for what it would bring, which is the sensible thing, the thrifty thing, the thing the quartermaster's ledger would have wanted. I would not do it. The colonel would not have done it. We dug him a soldier's grave in the field he was born to graze, a great wide grave that 12 men had worked through the night before to open in the half-frozen ground, taking it in turns, no one ordered to it, the spades passing hand to hand in the dark and the cold with the lanterns hung in the bare wood. And we laid the old gray horse in it with his head toward the wood and the dawn, the way you lay a soldier facing the line he held, and over him, before the earth went back. I did the last thing the rite called for, the thing I had borrowed from the deepest part of the color ceremony and bent to fit. I laid the color on him. Not the color itself that lives in the chapel and goes nowhere, but the old color, the campaign color, the one Vale had carried, the one too worn and too torn now to fly, that had hung furled and retired in its case in the mess for years because it was past flying and we could not bear to destroy it. I had asked the colonel for it, and he had given it to me without a word, only nodding, his jaw tight. We brought it out to the field cased, and we drew it from the case, and it came out tattered and faded and beautiful. The cloth he had carried through the campaign, the regiment made into a thing you could hold, and we unfurled it one last time over the open grave, 19 men holding the worn edges of it stretched flat above the old gray horse, and the wind that had moved once in the wood came down the field and lifted it, and the torn and faded color of the household of Kermore flew one last time over the grave of the horse that had carried it, in the white field in the frost, and 300 bareheaded men watched the cloth lift and fill and ripple in the cold morning light over the old soldier who had carried it home. Then we folded it. The 13 folds, the way we fold a color to retire it, the seventh fold turning the proud worn flying edge inward to rest. And at the last fold it was a tight gray wedge of cloth no bigger than a loaf, the whole campaign folded down small and put away. And I knelt at the head of the grave, and I laid the folded color in the earth against the old gray neck where 3 riders had pressed their faces, so that the thing he carried would lie with him in the field. The regiment and the horse that held its memory going into the ground of the long field together. And I stood, and I gave the command, and we put the earth back over the both of them slow, the spades passing hand to hand the way they had in the dark, every man in that field who could reach a spade taking his turn, 300 of them filing past to put a single spadeful of the cold earth of the long field over the old gray horse and the color he had carried, until the grave was filled, and stood a long low mound under the bare black wood, and the frost lay on it already, and it was done. I thought it was done. I want to tell you what happened after, because the after is the part I did not write and could not have, and it is the part that has stayed with me longest of a long life of mornings I have stood. When the last spadeful was patted down, when the mound stood finished and the lanterns had burned out in the wood and the sun had come over at last and laid a long thin gold light across the white field, I gave the honor party the command to recover, and they put their gloves back on, and around the field 300 men began quietly to put their caps back on their heads. And it was then, with the formal thing finished and the field given back to being only a field, that the holding finally let go. I have stood among soldiers my whole life. I have seen them in the worst of it. I have seen what they will not let themselves do in front of each other and how long they will not let themselves do it. And I am telling you that I watched, in that gold morning light, 300 of the kingdom's hardest men, men I had seen unmoved through things I will not describe to you, stand at the edges of the long field and weep without shame, openly, the tears running down into their collars in the cold, and not one of them turned his face away from another, and not one of them was ashamed. Because the thing had earned it, and they knew it had earned it, and there is a great freedom in being at last in the one place where the holding is allowed to stop. A young trooper near me, 18 perhaps, a boy who had never seen the campaign and never seen the horse carry anything but a saddle, a boy who could have had no memory in him of why the gray gelding mattered, stood with the tears coming down his young face, and could not have told you why he wept, except that he had stood in a field with 300 men who all knew something he did not yet know, and the weight of it had come into him through the soles of his boots, the way it comes into all of us in the end. The long memory of the regiment finding the newest vessel and pouring itself in. He wept for a horse he barely knew because the men around him wept, and the men around him wept for a great deal more than a horse, and that is how it is passed on. That is how the regiment keeps itself, not in the order books, in the cold mornings when the holding stops and a boy learns, without a word said, what it is he has joined. The colonel came down to the field. He had not been in the honor party. I had not asked it of him, an old man with a bad leg in a hard frost, but he had stood the whole of it at the top of the field by the wood, alone in his greatcoat. And when it was finished, he came down the slope slow on his stick, and the men made way for him without being told, and he came up to the low mound under the bare wood, and he stood at the head of it for a long time and said nothing. Then he took off his cap, the last man in the field still covered to come bareheaded, and he stood there with his old white head bare in the frost over the grave of the horse that had carried him off the Aldermere Bridge with the color round his body and a hole in his leg he still had, and he said, so low I think I am the only man who heard it, thank you. 40 years I have wanted to say it. Thank you, old friend. And he put his cap back on and he straightened and he turned to me, and his eyes were wet and he did not care, and he said, you did it right, Wren. You did it true. And from that old man, who did not give praise and had never once in 11 years given me a word more than the work required, that was the whole of the world. The thing got out, of course. These things do. There were no cameras in the field. The men had seen to that without a word among themselves, the way they see to things. A man who had raised a phone would have found a hand on his arm and a quiet word, and there were no phones raised. But you cannot have 300 soldiers stand a thing like that and have it stay in the field. And within a week the story of it had gone round the kingdom, told and retold. The regiment that buried a war horse with full honors and a folded color, and 300 men weeping in a frosted field. I had braced for the laughter. I had been so sure of the laughter, full honors for a horse, the captain's lost his sense, that I had decided in advance not to mind it. The laughter never came. I have thought about that a great deal. I think it is because the thing was true, and people, even people who have never stood a post in their lives and never will, can feel the difference between a true thing and a show. They had been given, their whole lives, the version of us that the tourists laugh at, the still men in the tall caps who, they like to say, have never done anything but stand there. And then they were given this, a glimpse, just a glimpse under the polish, of what the standing is for and what it costs and what it holds, and they went quiet, the way you go quiet when you have laughed at a man for years and then seen, once, the thing he was carrying the whole time. Letters came to the regiment, hundreds of them, from people who had never seen the horse and never would, ordinary people, saying only that they had not known, that they had not understood, and that they would not laugh again. A schoolmistress wrote that she had read the story to her class, and a hard boy at the back, a boy who laughed at everything, had asked her very quietly afterward what it meant to be relieved, and she had told him, and he had gone home and not laughed at anything for a week, and she thought it might have been the most important thing she ever taught him, and she did not know how to thank us for it. I keep that letter still. We put a stone in the long field in the end. A plain one, low and gray, the kind we use for a soldier, with no rank on it because a horse has no rank and needed none, and no long words, because the old gray horse had never had any use for long words, and I would not start giving them to him now that he could not roll his eye at me for it. We cut on it only his name, and the years he served, and under that the 4 words I had said to him with my bare hand flat on his neck, the 4 words that are the whole of what we are and the whole of what we are for, and the only honor in the end, that any of us can do another. We have the watch. And men go there. That is the thing I did not expect and treasure most. The long field is not on any route and no one is sent to it, but men go there, young troopers on a free afternoon, walking out to the west field below the wood on their own, with no one ordering them and no one watching, to stand a moment by a low gray stone under the bare trees, and read the 4 words and put their hand for a moment on the cold top of the stone, the way I put mine on the warm neck. They could not tell you why they go, most of them. They go because the regiment goes, because the long memory has found them and poured itself in, because somewhere in them is the same river the old gray horse carried us all across without ever knowing he had done it. And the stone in the long field is as near as the world will ever let them come to being told that the thing they carry is seen. I am an old man myself now, near my own long field. I have stood a great many parades and given a great many orders, and I have forgotten most of them, the way you forget the days that were only days. But I have not forgotten the morning we walked out in our best tunics to render to an old gray horse the honors of his regiment, and I have not forgotten the way he straightened when he saw the red coming down the white field, the way 29 years of it came up in him, and made him stand to be inspected one last time, because a column was walking toward him in step, and that is what you did, you stood up. You stood up and let them see you had not let go of the thing. That is the whole of it. That is what we are, under the polish and the laughter and the tall caps. We are the ones who hold the weight and do not move, and we are the ones who, when one of us has held it long enough, walk out into a frosted field in our best tunics to take the post off him slow, and tell him with a bare hand on his neck and a salute we hold past all reason that the line is kept and he can rest now, that he is relieved, that we have the watch. We learned it from a horse, half of us. We could not have learned it from a better teacher. And we are still, every one of us, the newest trooper and the oldest captain, only trying to be worthy of the thing an old gray gelding did for 29 years without ever being told he was a hero, which is to stand still through everything, and carry what is given you, and not let go of it, and not run. Stand easy, old soldier, we have the watch.